Yeah.
Okay, so this chapter, chapter 17, has a lot of good stuff in it. I even shared a excerpt from it in the server during
I
conversation.
remember.
It ended up being relevant. I was like, oh, that's neat. I love it when life is like that. When a book that you're reading ends up relating to a real world situation. So that's nice. So it starts off in how we think about our bodhisattva training. And then Pema talks about 6 traditional activities the bodhisattva must train, which includes compassionate living. So these are generosity, discipline, patience, enthusiasm, meditation, and prajna, which is unconditional wisdom. So that's nice to be given this nice little list. I'm a fan of lists, so I enjoy how she does that for the reader so that it feels really easy and concise to kind of go through that information and think about it. Um, that's how my brain works, so I appreciate it a lot. The first thing that really ended up jumping out to me in this chapter was the foundation of, let me find it in the PDF. Sorry, I do all of my notes physically and then have to
And
figure out.
you can't find the corresponding text anymore.
Yeah, it takes me a hot second. There it is. So the foundation of Paramita is mindfulness and open-ended inquiry into our experience. Um, this is just touching into the same stuff we get into a lot, I think, with the practice, but really putting it concisely as an open-ended inquiry into our experience is really kind of a pretty way of saying it to me. Um, just, uh, just, just being curious about experience. I
Mm-hmm.
like it.
Yeah.
I ended up actually bringing this into a conversation shortly after reading this book, reading this chapter. So that was fun as far as this particular anecdote, which is it's like lying in bed before dawn and hearing rain on the roof. The simple sound can be disappointing because we were planning a picnic. It can be pleasing because our garden is so dry. But the flexible mind of Prajna doesn't draw a conclusion of good or bad. Um, and I thought that was really relevant as we go through our practice. So, where I really connected this in my mind was to some cognitive behavioral therapy practices about the narrative we tell ourselves. So, this particular chapter sticks out to me as something I might utilize as a tool when talking with somebody with high anxiety, um, because this particular anecdote is very simple and relatable. Like it's the rain itself can be a good or a bad thing depending on what you tell yourself about it, right? So I thought that was.
Yeah, it's all projection depending on where we are right now.
Mm-hmm. And then, as always, she gives us a great tool to begin to think about others. So, pain is always a sign that we are holding on to something, usually ourselves. And I know she's talking about that in reference to self, right? But it's immediately to me something that calls out to me of because I see a lot of people's actions that I find distasteful are often coming from a source of pain inside of them. And if I can understand in my practice that they're clinging to something, I can have more empathy for that.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah, I can see that.
so yeah, this chapter was really thought provoking for me and some reflection time. Um, to jump ahead just a bit, we're gonna breeze through some things. If you want to stop and chat about anything, please just stop me
Mm-hmm. Sure.
as always. Um, but giving practice shows us where we're holding back, where we're still clinging. This was, I thought, really relevant for the time of year we're in with all the holidays going on. For different people of different cultures, this seems to be a very holiday rich time of year. and a lot of those holidays are about giving of some form. And so this particular section for me, it's interesting because I'm in such a weird position with my life circumstances financially that on the one hand I want to be generous and on the other hand I have to think about the safety and needs of my family.
Mm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, sure.
And so it's interesting to see in what ways I'm clinging, not just to that those finances because I'm scared, but also clinging to ideas of who I am as a person and what it means to be generous or what it, you know what I mean? So
I'm not sure actually.
it's okay. I know it's all really confusing. Want, I think somewhere inside of me, I want desperately to be seen as a very particular kind of person.
Mm.
I have an expectation that when people think of me, I want them to think, oh, Des is, blank, blank, blank. And those blanks, I want them to be things like kind, giving, and you know what I mean? I want them to be these very positive attributes, and I
Sure,
cling to
sure.
that idea. Um, and I become aware of it when I feel like I'm incapable of acting on those ideas I want to be seen as.
I see. Yeah.
And so it's not
Yeah.
just, yeah.
Yeah. And next question would be why you want to be seen like that.
Hmm. Right. And that just starts the process for me of like, okay, well,
Mm.
why do I want to be this way? Does it matter
Yeah.
if I am this way? You know, why am I allowing myself to suffer for something that should be ultimately positive, but I don't allow to be positive because I get
Mm.
anxious about it.
And
Um,
yeah, what's the story behind that? Exactly.
and then I was, sorry, to jump thought processes a bit, but also vaguely connected. She says, but the Bodhisattva's world is not that simple. The power of the paramitas is not that they are commandments, but they challenge our habitual reactions. And I found that really important for me personally. I, for the reality is, I've been attempting to practice longer or at least about the same amount of time now as I spent as a uh, member of the Christian church. And yet
Mm-hmm.
it feels like I have so much more to untangle from that time, if that makes sense. And the idea that when we're given quote unquote rules as people who practice, if you think about the precepts, even, um, and then someone comes in and says, these aren't commandments, they challenge us. And I was like, wow. Sorry. It's just to really change the way I look at things has been interesting
Yeah, I can see that.
because in many ways, and she kind of talks about this. I can't remember if it's in this chapter or the next chapter. Using a spiritual practice as its own new way to enforce our egos. I want to say she talks about this. Yes, 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 yes. Is at the very beginning of the chapter 18. I'm going to read it real quick. I'm not going to skip to it on the screen. Ego can use anything to maintain the illusion of security, including the belief in insubstantiality and change. And she also gets into how it can use uh, just, spiritual structure itself. And so it's funny, we choose this spiritual walk that's meant to be about not letting our ego do XYZ, but our ego can just use that too. You know?
Yeah, yeah. Ego is a sneaky bastard.
It's so sneaky. Oh my gosh. And I felt like this was really good. These two chapters, 17 and 18, and making me really realize where I'm letting my ego do things and I thought I wasn't because I'm following the so-called practice. You know what I mean?
Mm.
Anyway, what like you said, it's just sneaky, and it's just always interesting how sneaky it is. I'm going to find the thing. Trying to find it. There's a nice anecdote about somebody kicking her car after thinking about being super patient. in life and appreciating the absurdity of the situation, which I thought was a cute little anecdote. I was trying to find the bit that I actually shared in the Sangha.
Um,
Oh, there it is. Okay. Um, Found it. It's just separated real different than it is in my physical copy. Bodhisattvas are to be found among thieves and prostitutes and murderers. And then she talks about the traditional story about compassionate heart, and this pirate comes, and after he empathizes with the pirate, he does kill the pirate. In the same vein, we sometimes have to tell a lie in order to protect someone from harm. There is no act that is inherently virtuous or non virtuous. The warrior trains in discipline of not causing harm, knowing that the way to do this skillfully will change with the circumstances. And I thought this was interesting thought process going on here, and was pertinent to the situation that was brought up by somebody in the server. So, and as she puts it, we become less moralistic and more tolerant. So, anyway, that I thought that was cool. Oh, it was after this that she talks about the two strangers screaming at each other, and he felt the absurdity and tenderness of their situation. It's funny to
hmm.
think of a moment where you're screaming at a stranger as tender.
Oh,
But
that's yeah. Um, that's I mean, guess your perspective will really change depending
I
on
think
your outlook
I
or
think
your state of mind.
realistically, in our moments of like real anger, I think we are being kind of vulnerable. You know?
I
Anyway.
mean, I'm not sure if vulnerable is the word I'd use, but oh, I mean, we could be if we are aware in that moment, then we could really do the whole body cheetah thing and
Mhm.
be open and vulnerable and all that jazz.
Mhm. Um, the next part I'm gonna highlight really hit me because it really struck me as something I need to think about in my work because I'm a teacher professionally, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And so this we just eagerly put one foot in front of the other and are not discouraged when we fall flat on our faces. We act without self-congratulations or self-censure, without fearing criticism or expecting applause. And for me, that was something to reflect on as I aim to be a good teacher, you know, and felt very applicable because my work is challenging and I need to be not be discouraged when it feels like I'm falling on my face,
Mm,
and but also to do the work joyfully without expecting applause for being,
yeah.
like, oh, look at that, such a good teacher.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I see.
And obviously that's applicable as a spiritual teacher if one is such, but it, at least for my day job, that felt very applicable as well. And then, as always, oftentimes we struggle, I think, to put the practice inward, hilariously enough, because we see our thoughts and emotions with compassion, we stop struggling against ourselves. Um, so, somebody in the server asked if I don't remember how they put it, but it was effectively like practicing it towards yourself. Um, or at least that's how I ended up interpreting it. And remembering how important it is to practice towards yourself feels really important. And then she just goes over once again. the 6 activities of the warrior, including generosity, discipline, patience, joyful,
Uh,
enthusiasm, meditation, and prajna. Super fun stuff here. Patience. Letting go of perfectionism is so hard, Ben.
that's one bullet I dodged thankfully.
Oh god, you're like, oh, I'm free of that. Good, good.
Nah, I just wing it all the time.
And then I quoted this a few minutes ago. Ego can use anything to maintain the illusion of security, including the belief in sustainability and change. So that's funny to me, right? Like one of the inherent thoughts in Buddhism often is that things are change and like water, right? Like they move and you can't cling to expectations. But even doing that can be ego.
Yeah,
And so that's wild. I don't know. Not that it's not that wild. You know what I mean. Um, so this she talks about the situation in which the Heart Sutra was given, and the
hmm
Buddha's principal message that day was that holding on to anything blocks wisdom. I did share a link to the Heart Sutra in Sangha Book Club. You've probably read it, but if you haven't and want to, it's right there. Um, any
I
hmm,
probably read it at some point, but
yeah,
it's not fully present anymore.
mhm, that's fine. It's there. I reviewed it myself as a just a refresher. Ultimately, from this, she talks about how it's really important that people asked questions and that the questions were part of the clarifying. And nothing was taken complacently or on blind faith. Um, and so I think finding joy in the questioning, not just in you asking questions, but when people ask questions of you, is really an important practice to have because of one, we don't want anybody to take anything complacently or on blind faith, just like the Buddha didn't, right? But I think in forcing us to clarify our thoughts, oftentimes we might find new enlightenment. Um, I'm going to skip down to this one paragraph. And I think the sentence is really important if I can find it. We train when we're caught off guard and when our life is up in the air. I can't find it for some reason. There it is. We train, as Trungpa Rinpoche said in Not Afraid to Be a Fool. We cultivate a simple, direct relationship with our being. No philosophizing, no moralizing, no judgments. Whatever arises in our mind is workable. I've heard it said before that you have, like, as much as I love reading and finding new insights, I've heard it said before that a person has all the tools they need inside themselves to reach enlightenment already. And so this kind of reminds me of that thought process that whatever you have inside of you can be worked with and used to further your practice.
I agree with that.
Yeah, awesome. Lots of good little thoughts in this. This chapter is worth a more thorough read at some point for whoever is interested. Um, Another real quick thing I wanted to point out was a sentence not too far from that one. We keep pulling out. Da, 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 da. Ah, why does this always look so different from my book? We keep pulling the rug out from under ourselves. We perceive form as empty, without any barriers or veils. We understand the perfection of things just as they are. Um, a thought I've had in the past, and I haven't put a lot of thought into it recently, but this struck me as a memory. Was that sometimes we try to, at least I do, I try to glamorize my thought processes about things. Like, I want to say I get floaty about them. It's like, oh yes, a a flower made in perfection by earth, and like you just get kind of like everything's on a pedestal mentality. But the reality is, I have to see them as they are, and not in this my mind's eye of they're beautiful for all these other angelic reasons. But reality is that they're just as they are, not on a pedestal. That's the perfection.
Yeah, and yeah, things are what they are, and uh, no need to change anything. Not that you could change anything.
Mhm. And then I'm gonna skip some of this chapter. Not that it's not worth thinking about. Um, to this thought, which is enlightenment is not the end of anything. Enlightenment, being completely awake, is just the beginning of fully entering into we know not what. I think it can feel like a race sometimes to enlightenment of like, I gotta get there, I gotta get enlightened. Because once I'm enlightened, everything's gonna be better, you know? If I,
Yeah,
if I can just be enlightened, everything will be perfect. Um, but it's just the beginning, as she puts it here. um, and those in the audience who hadn't walked out or died from the heart attacks rejoiced. They rejoiced at hearing this teaching on stepping beyond fear. She's so good at ending chapters.
yeah,
um, chapter 19, heightened neurosis, was also good, and that moving in the direction of nothing to hold on to is daring. Um, so I thought that was very true. Is that
yeah. I mean, it's basically going out on a tightrope.
mm-hmm. We have to become groundless. And it is terrifying when you actually begin to approach that feeling. It's terrifying. I I want to say that at least a time or two in my life, I have felt myself approach what I think was the sensation of groundlessness, and I instinctively let my ego protect me and
Mm.
backed away from it real hard. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And so I feel like I have tasted a drop of a major step to enlightenment and then just violently smacked it in the face and said, "No,
I don't wanna.
I don't wanna." Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, the ego is in the end that what's on the chopping block, so and it will try to protect itself.
So true. Oh, so true. But when we start to interrupt our ordinary ways of calling ourselves names and patting ourselves on the back, we are doing something extremely brave. Slowly, we edge towards the open state, but let's face it, we are moving towards a place of no handholds, no footholds, no mindholds. This may be called liberation, but for a long time it feels like insecurity. Don't I know it? um, and then she does something interesting that I think is really important for a beginner, somebody with a beginner's mind to keep in insight, which is that sometimes our neurotic tendencies can develop because of the practice rather than outside of it. You know, it's um, sometimes we practice. Let's see, she starts to talk about we use the practice to reinforce poverty mentality and that a what it means to be a good warrior or a bad warrior, and we use the training against ourselves, trying to jump over issues that we're avoiding. Um, and then she's just very sassy. She's like, "Just welcome to the human race. That's part of it." And it is interesting. And so she, as she says, and as I know I have done in the past, we let's see, where did it go? We try to use our spiritual training to avoid the queasy feeling in our gut.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, stop calling me out, Pima. Oh, all right. We're going to continue our blitz through this through these chapters. Absolutely worth like slowing down to read chapter 19 for if you feel like it. And the continual training of the Maitri. I can't remember what chapter that was in. I have it noted somewhere. Do, 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 chapter 20. The most straightforward advice on awakening bodhicitta. Oh my gosh, what is my highlighter doing? Straightforward advice on the awakening bodhicitta is this: practice not causing harm to anyone, yourself, or others, and every day do what you can to be helpful. Nice little fun statement. But we'll probably find that it is not easy. It's not. For let's see, the four methods of holding our seat provide just such support. Not setting up the target for the arrow, connecting with the heart, seeing obstacles as teachers, and regarding all that occurs as a dream. So this gets a little more. I would say chapter 20 gets a little more spiritual, which is funny because it's not that the other parts of the book don't touch on spirituality, but I do think this particular chapter is just a touch more than some of the other stuff that she ends up talking about.
Yeah, I mean, that seems to be the case.
Um, but when she talks about this first part of setting up the target, I like what she says here of this is to say that each time we retaliate with aggressive words and actions, we are strengthening the habit of anger, which I think most people agree with just instinctively. We know this to be true, that if we don't control ourselves, we enforce how we respond to things, and that it just encourages hardship and suffering to come our way. But sometimes it's hard to acknowledge that, or at least to accept it as something to actually fix. Um, so then through this training, we have to start to dissolve a pattern of aggression that will continue to hurt us and others forever if we let it. There it is. There's the sentence. Um, going to the second method, where you connect with the heart, we have to remember that the one who harms us does not need to be provoked further, and neither do we. I think that one's really hard. Um, I personally, when I get provoked, I do feel very instinctively like I want to lash out and hurt them back. But
Oh
that
yeah,
just,
absolutely.
yeah, that just exacerbates suffering for me and them, you know?
That's not for the greater good, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Um, and life has given me a plethora of opportunity recently to practice that particular skill of not lashing out. Am I excited about that? No, but I'm trying to utilize it if I can. Um, this one, I feel like she hits this actually a few times in her book in different ways, which is that instruction, um, seeing difficulties as a teacher, your obstacles as a teacher. She hits this a lot, and it is one that I try to utilize as much as possible. Um, is that when things are frustrating, people are frustrating me. Like, what can I learn from this moment? What can I learn from this moment? And sometimes that makes the moment less frustrating. And I'm not saying I'm perfect at this. I'm absolutely ticked off all the time.
Hmm.
um, I, I have anger problems,
Yeah,
but
but basically that's I mean that also points to the shadow work again. Basically, when you have situations that trigger you or your
mm-hmm.
anger or something, you can use that and really go into that and analyze why is that
Yeah, absolutely.
triggering me and where does that come from.
Mm-hmm. If you want to be able to practice every day, work with children. That's that's what my advice is.
Jesus.
If you're like, man, I really need to be challenged, work with children. um, you got to remember. Let's see. Oh, she says it so well. What we just right there it is. Right at the point when we are about to blow our top or withdraw into oblivion, we can remember this. We are warriors in training being taught how to sit with edginess and discomfort. We are being challenged to remain and to relax where we are. Yep.
Yeah, and that's so difficult because you really need to be careful not to just go into suppression of the anger.
Yes. There's a difference between sitting with your anger and bottling it up, right? Like not letting it cause bad action and just putting it away somewhere. And that was a bad
Hmm.
habit of mine for a very long time. And I'm sure I still do it to some degree, but I'm much better than I used to be of bottling my emotions.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And that was very unhealthy.
Yeah.
The problem with following these or any oop, yep. These or any instructions is that we have a tendency to be too serious and rigid. We get tense and uptight about trying to relax and be patient, which is what I do.
Ah.
I'm like, I gotta relax. Just, it's like I'm not doing it. It's not happening. Obviously. Uh, we don't need to go through all of them, but she does have a great list of questions to go through for oneself that were a great little practice for me at the time. They're kind of right here, which is who's the monolith of me that has been so offended. Kind of a way to go through a process, and ask yourself like, why is this bothering me? Nice little questions here. Um, and then she tries to kick you in the butt and says, "Don't wait, do it now." Which I think is particularly good timing for our session right after New Year's Eve, as people embark upon New Year's resolutions and ask themselves, what am I going to try to change? Well, do it now. Stop waiting. It is the new year. The time is now.
Yeah, but ideally you don't wait for the new year, but you do it when it comes up.
Yeah, you want to do it when it comes up. But if you need that symbolic time, the symbolic time is now.
Yeah. But I always thought New Year's resolutions were bullcrap for this exact reason.
They are. They are bullcrap. I think that they present people with excuses to put off change that they know they need.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's an issue. Um, Chapter 21 is interesting in that it's about finding a spiritual friend slash teacher for yourself and how much more rich your practice can be with the presence of somebody who can help guide you and who's on a higher level than you of their practice. And she talks about her own connection with her teacher, Ringpoche. And as she puts it, uh, do, 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 the teacher's role is to help the student realize that his awakened mind and the teacher's are the same, which is very interesting. Oh no, my friend is calling me. Oh, I think I messed up the time zone thing. Dang it, I did. I will text her here in a second. I told her I'd be free at a certain time, and I think that I. Oops. Okay. Okay. Sorry. Let's finish up. Okay. So the teacher's role is to help the student realize that this awakened mind and the teachers are the same. And then I thought a continuation of this thought down here was that this relationship will show us if our heart is big enough to welcome the whole gamut of life, not just the part we approve of. So a good teacher is going to challenge you on so many levels, right? And that we, as she puts it, we slowly move in the direction of allowing every person we meet to be our teacher. So that's what your spiritual teacher is going to do is take you through that, help get you through some of these more difficult stages of the practice, and that sometimes it's going to be difficult, and sometimes relationships don't last in this way. But the unconditional commitment to others, to ourselves, and to others is what is going to be meant as limitless love, as the teacher's love for the student manifests as compassion. Anyway, that was my hot and fast summary of chapter 21. Was to pick out those few quotes.
Good job.
Thank you. Chapter 22, the in between state. Um, I had a more scattered time reading this, unfortunately, because I tried to read it while watching my child. And he was being real fussy.
Mm.
So, so I was not fully engaged while reading this final chapter of the book. And I apologize.
I
But
mean, I wasn't, as I said, I wasn't able to reread it at all, so you are still have something ahead of me.
I did find a few quotes that I'd like to highlight for you. This is exactly how we're training every time we sit in meditation. We see what comes up, acknowledge that with kindness, and let go. Thoughts and emotions rise and fall. Some are more convincing than others. So, once again, what I really have loved about this book, and I will recommend it to any person who asks who's interested in the practice, is that Pema explains things. She doesn't assume you know exactly what it means, but like, okay, go sit and meditate. She sits, she takes a moment to say the thoughts are going to come. You're going to acknowledge them with kindness, and some of those thoughts are going to be a little more convincing than others. You know.
Mm.
So, as she puts it, this is the basic training in Maitri that we need to just keep going forward and to just keep opening our heart. It's pretty simple, and it's funny to me that the whole book culminates to a very simplistic understanding of everything, of just opening our hearts. But then there's also a little paradox that she touches on briefly, which is that there the paradox of something's being both right and wrong, of someone's being strong and loving, and also angry, uptight, and stingy. As we open our heart, we see the people in these ways, right? And that we can see them as they are. They are both someone strong and loving, angry, uptight, and stingy. Um, and can it be painful in those moments when we don't live up to our own standards? My goodness, do I know it? I am constantly letting myself down. Do we condemn
Oh,
ourselves or truly appreciate the paradox of being human? And I just love this because it really pushes you to not bury the things that are negative about you, but accept them as part of your experience of humanity, you know?
yeah, absolutely.
So then there's another quick little. That's why compassion and maitri, along with courage, are vital. They give us the resources to be genuine about where we are, but at the same time to know that we are always in transition, that the only time is now, and that the future is completely unpredictable and open. So for me, in my life, that particular statement really strikes a very comforting chord in some ways. You know what I mean? And perhaps my ego is clinging to that insustainability and change as an inevitability to work through some issues. But at this time, I'm very grateful for it, of
Mm,
feeling a little more secure in the insecurity, if that makes sense.
yeah, absolutely.
And
Because it means that also you're assumed, or you're if you are prone to catastrophizing, that
mm-hmm,
is also not then you will be aware that that is also not an accurate representation of the future, because you just can't know what's going to happen.
absolutely, exactly, Ben. And that is the end of the book. We did
Yay.
it. Do you have any thoughts?
Oh, I'm afraid I don't have a whole lot of thoughts in my head today.
Okay, that's fine. I'm sorry you're still not feeling well, but we have finished the book.
We